anything that pertains to the shop is just so deep to me. So it's not just like, oh, I don't like the way that laptops look. It's just that, when I look into the dining room, I want to see people like enjoying themselves, having fun, because I'm slaving in the kitchen.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Eliza Barbanel. Valeria Socorro Velazquez Lindsten is the owner and head baker of Loba Pastry and Coffee, a beloved Chicago cafe. Originally from Guadalajara, Mexico, she worked in pastry at several spots across Chicago before creating her very own bakery with delights like the green mole croissant and pineapple sourdough muffin. It's so fun to have her on the show to talk about her pastry perspective, the struggles and successes of opening a small business, and more. Valeria Socorro Velazquez Lindsten, this is Taste. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm in the best mood right now because I got to go to Loba earlier today and eat like all of the pastries in the pastry case. And the most obsessive one to me is the green mole croissant.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that you've done other mole croissants in the past. Can you tell me about the iterations?
Yeah. If you don't know anything about mole, it's very distinct to whatever region of Mexico you're from. The mole that I grew up with is actually called pipián. It's a pumpkin seed mole. And from what I know, is closer to like the original version of mole, which would be siquilpac, which is like traditionally from the southern part of Mexico. So in my region, we call it like orange mole or pipián. And that's the green mole now, just because it's like an offshoot of that. But I've also made black mole, which is the chocolatey, I think the one that most people are familiar with, originally from Oaxaca. It has cacao beans and it's that richer taste. And I've also done red mole, and that's from Morelos. So it's like East Coast Mexico, and it has annatto. So it's also sweet, but like not as rich per se, and maybe sometimes spicier than black mole.
Yeah, I thought that the heat on this green mole croissant was really fun, and it also had almost like a white chocolate kind of vibe to me. Is there white chocolate in there?
Yeah, there's white chocolate inside.
Oh, okay, good start for me. So are you laminating the mole into the pastry?
Yeah.
Is that hard?
Yes.
Okay, can you walk me through the process?
It's complicated, but also not. The process of making croissants is basically, they call it lamination. So you just basically want to have very thin sheets of butter in between thin sheets of dough. Mm-hmm. That's really it. There's like folds, there's like exponential increases and all these like technical terms. But we start with a mole paste. So, think of like all of the spices, chiles, herbs. They get ground up, dehydrated a little bit. So it's a little bit thicker. We mix that with butter, which lowers the fat content. And that's another thing. I think most croissants have about 40% fat, or that's the maximum that you can laminate with. So depending on where you're at, it's like 25 to 40%. The higher the fat content, sort of like the easier it is to laminate. We make the mole paste, we mix it with butter, so it's mole butter, and we use that to laminate, but it's a lower fat content. So it just means that it softens faster.
So I guess to zoom out for a second, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your perspective as a baker and like what kinds of things you're hoping to accomplish in the pastry case at Loba.
I'm interested in innovation, I think, just because there's so much, I'll just say it. I think American pastry is so boring. Like, I am so tired of chocolate chip cookies. I don't even like them. I feel like, yeah, it's chocolate. Of course, it tastes good. But like, why are we still having those? Why are we still obsessed with chocolate chip cookies? And there's just so many flavors per region, per season, in different parts of the world, per culture, that I feel like there's so much more that is still not explored. And not to sound like a colonizer, I'm just like, I'm not trying to take over any specific culture, just like highlighting different flavor combinations that people are not used to, especially in a coffee shop setting, especially in a bakery setting. Aside from that, like interesting flavor combinations, but also like improving on technique a little bit. That's my perspective as a baker. That's what I always try to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to talk about it in the context of a coffee shop also, because I do think there is kind of like, a lot of bakeries, maybe they serve coffee, but you're not expected to sit and linger somewhere. And when it is the coffee shop, I do think there is that really kind of expected canon of like a pumpkin loaf cake or maybe a Madeleine or the chocolate chip cookie or something like that. So I feel like to be able to be playing with baked goods in a space where people can actually like sit down and enjoy them must be kind of interesting for you as well.
Yeah. Very much so. Just exploring different options, whether we like it or not, those national retailers sort of lead the way as far as what the public prefers. So anything that you'd see in those, I don't know, pop culture, I'm just, I don't know. I'm so anti-pop, I guess.
So I guess to talk a little bit about your own background here in Chicago, I know that you were cooking at, various kind of like fine dining spots in the city and kind of refining your own pastry craft. What inspired you to want to open your own space? Because that obviously is a huge endeavor.
Mostly, I think I realized very quickly how there was no future for me in the industry that I wanted to be in. The time that I spent in fine dining was not, it's almost not relevant to mention the restaurants that I was at because it's not like I had any relevant position. I realized that I was not going to be promoted. I was not going to be paid a fair wage. I was just not going to be looked at more than, like maybe free help or like someone who was there temporarily. And it was upsetting because, I think it would be justified, like maybe I wasn't good enough, I didn't have enough experience, but when it happens like over and over again, you get passed for promotions, they don't want to give you the position that you asked for, they like lowball you. I just realized very quickly that I wasn't going to make it very far. So I decided to sort of build the future that I wanted for myself and people like me. It's very different now, but, when I first moved to Chicago in 2010, I had only been in the States for 5 years at that point. And I'm an incredibly, like, fastidious, obsessive person, but my English was very different. I had been living in Florida previously, so my skin was darker, my accent was thicker, my style was different, and also I was significantly younger. I was only 21. So I had everything to prove and nobody was paying attention, nobody cared. And I mean, I get it. There's so many reasons. I was also just very hungry, very new, very fresh. So everything kind of makes sense looking back on it, but it's still, the reality is that there was no future for me. I like the one comparison that I want to make, or that is easier to make now, that show that is very popular, The Bear.
Yes, I've heard of it.
Based in Chicago. I can't watch it. So, from what I know, we're seeing the life and the experience of this chef. And he is a white guy. He is like, what's it called? Average looking white guy, or maybe very good looking white guy, whatever.
I would say like for some reason he's become like a sex symbol, but I would agree with you that he doesn't look like a movie star.
Yeah,
he's a guy.
Yeah, he's a guy. So, and you see, how he is treated in the kitchen, and it's this awful experience. And I'm like, okay, so imagine that, because I was in those kitchens. Just imagine that. But instead of being this man who looks like everybody else, talks like everybody else, it's a 5'4", brown skin, thick accent Mexican girl who still does not understand the way of the kitchen. Just like imagine how I was treated, And that's all I have to say. I still, try to work as hard as I could, and I try to, I don't know, get noticed, go the extra mile. My work ethic has always been a little extra, but nobody cared, I had to walk away.
Yeah, I mean, I think it must be hard to walk away from something that is set up in the industry as the pinnacle of what you're supposed to be trying to achieve. But being able to do that has kind of opened up this whole other world for you with what you're able to do. I'm curious, like Loba has been through 2 iterations, right? You moved venues, and I remember when I was doing research for this episode, I read this incredibly moving and intense article that you wrote for Eater about how difficult it was for you to reopen Loba in a new location when your lease was up because you didn't have major backing. And it was so surreal because obviously I know the industry is really hard to get licensing and spaces, but at the same time you had all of these media accolades by that point and this dedicated consumer base and these incredible pastries. And you still were rejected for a business loan, and you had to do 3 rounds of crowdfunding, which was ultimately successful. And I went to the space this morning that you were able to open, and it is like a really beautiful, vibey, fun coffee shop. I guess I'm curious, like going through all of that, like what is your takeaway from that experience now? If you could go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice or 3 pieces of advice or something.
I think that unfortunately we haven't evolved as much as we thought that we had evolved. Regardless of how many strides we've made in feminism and the independence that women have, we're still considered second-class citizens. I can't tell you how many times people are asking me to get my parents to co-sign. I was still like, I was not considered for these loans as a single entity, even though I built this place from the ground up. It was always like, but what about a man? What about a husband? What about a father? What about parents? What about a rich uncle? It was... People were always asking me to show that I had the support from like a male counterpart, And I mean, that's one part. The other part is that it doesn't matter how many mentions you get. All that matters is how many assets you have, So...
And you had not been operating, so you didn't have active income coming in at that point in time.
Yeah, that was a big one. When I applied for the loan, my lease, not only were we coming off the second year of the pandemic, my lease was already up. There was no stream of income. It's, once again, it's like, I get it. A financial institution is a financial institution. They just want to get their money back. But I thought I had built enough of a reputation, history, I thought I had enough to vouch for myself, and it just wasn't enough.
Yeah, and they don't care how delicious the pineapple sourdough muffins might be.
They don't care. They really don't care.
Did you bring a basket of baked goods? I feel like
I did not. I actually did not.
I mean, Valeria, that could have changed everything.
Missed opportunity right there.
I have a friend who's a food stylist in New York who was trying to get an apartment and baked and brought them to the landlord. And I don't know if that's what did it for her, but she did get the apartment.
Wow.
But I do think, these institutions are not built to be giving chances to people. They're built to be protecting their assets. Mm-hmm. And it's really inspiring to see that your community was able to show up for you through 3 rounds of crowdfunding. I'm curious, like, how the community vibe is now that Loba is back open. Do you do events with people? Like, how does kind of the space function as a community space?
It still kind of functions as a community space. I think all coffee shops are community spaces. And that's why it will continue, or Loba will continue to be a bakery/coffee shop.
You have like no laptops, I feel like is one thing that's a good effort to keep people from just being on their computers all day.
Oh my God. Yeah. I think some people get very upset with us about the laptop rule. But, and it's not like I hate technology or anything like that. It's just the space is very small. We only have 5 tables, and if somebody wants to be working on their laptop, there's only going to be 5 people working on their laptops. And that's good. I mean, there's co-working spaces for that. Go to the library, stay at home. This is a place of business.
Isn't your Instagram bio like a fancy coffee shop and bakery, not a co-working space?
Yeah, definitely not a co-working space. Anything that pertains to the shop is just so deep to me because it is an extension of myself. There's no shallow answers. Anything that I do is so intentional. I've thought about it so much. It means so much to me. It's like core values. So it's not just like, oh, I don't like the way that laptops look. It's just that, I go to work every day. I'm going to be working in the kitchen. I don't want to look at you working while I'm working too. When I look into the dining room, I want to see people like enjoying themselves, having fun, because I'm slaving in the kitchen. Same, if if anybody that I know that I've met through the shop needs a space to get together or to have an event, I'll offer it. I've done some pop-ups. My, I guess, new friend, Nia, I actually met her at a New Year's Eve party just at random. It turns out that she works down the street and she was looking for a place to hold this thing called Conscious Conversation. And it's for young Black artists to get together and talk about what it means to be young Black artists. And, like, I didn't remember meeting her when I saw her at this party, but I was like, hey, like, if you want to get together, if you need a place, just like let me know. And I'm glad that she took me up on the offer. But it's things like that, I don't think I don't go out of my way to be a community spot. I feel like because I'm part of the community, these like instances or these opportunities just like happen, and that's my preferred way. I'm not looking to like spread the word of Loba. I'm there all the time. You're coming here often. I'm gonna recognize your face. I'm gonna learn your name. I'm gonna talk to you about what do you like to do, just because like that's what makes my day go by faster. That's what makes my work more enjoyable. Just connecting with people,
Definitely.
I love it.
Yeah, and what you said earlier about coffee shops essentially being a community space is so true. And even when you look at the history of coffee shops opening, it was this third space concept of it's not work, it's not home, it's something else. And I think it's just really beautiful to see that intentionality even when you walk into the space. I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about the drinks component of Loba.
The drinks are just right now, or so far, it just whatever pops into my head, like there's ingredients that I get maybe for a pastry that I forget about. And then, I find them, I don't know, 5 months later, the next year. And I'm like, oh, let me use this right now. So there's really no rhyme or reason for it. However, this far into it, it's worth mentioning that I think for the first 2 years of opening Loba, I did not have any flavored drinks because I wanted to put the emphasis on the flavor of the pastries. So it was pretty straight, just like espresso, latte, cold brew. That's it.
And what roaster are you using?
Right now, we're using Little Waves. They are a woman-owned roaster based out of Durham, North Carolina, and Latina woman-owned. And that's exactly why I picked them, because they're a business like me. They started from the ground up. I know what it's like. They know what it's like. But not just that, when I was looking to switching, so I'm originally from Mexico. I was looking at different roasters, and the coffee that they were offering it's usually, the Colombias, the Guatemalas, the like really fancy Sri Lanka or like African coffees. Ethiopia, sorry, the fruity ones. And, growing up in Mexico, and every time that I go back to visit, the coffee is outstanding. It's so good. And I was like, why can't I find Mexican coffee with U.S. roasters? And I did a little bit of a deep dive. One of the reasons why is because Mexico is a coffee drinking country. So the best of the Mexican green coffee stays in Mexico. But number two, whatever's left over, since the rating is not as high, roasters don't want to take a risk with a subpar green coffee. So, there wasn't much of an exchange or of an export anyway. And what made me switch to Little Waves is because they started buying Mexican coffee to roast in Durham. Their whole intention behind it is that, maybe they're not getting the top rate green product, but they're buying product and supporting these local communities. And by investing in them, maybe they'll eventually, on the next harvest, the second season or whatever down the road, the small farmers will want to give them a better rate or like a better product eventually, so more roasters are doing that. But as far as I'm concerned, our Little Waves was the first roaster that I became aware of that was doing this in Mexico. Like if you invest in a community, you'll get returns. You're also, helping promote the local economy of the place, the farmer and their future. So I thought it was really great. And
yeah, and I had a really great cortado this morning with that coffee, and I was a big fan of it. And I was dunking bits of the pineapple muffin into it. I don't know if that was the intention, but
you can dunk, you can soak, you can chug. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to drink coffee. That's personal to each person.
Jump across the bar, smack someone's hand down. So you have expanded past just doing classic coffee into doing these kind of flavored drinks and things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fun exercise for you to be coming up with those?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't want to sound pompous, but it's not hard. It's fun.
What, like it's hard?
Yeah, what, like it's hard? I've been drinking coffee my whole life. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little story.
Please.
I have so many tangents. Okay, so I'm from Guadalajara. It's the second largest city in Mexico. It's basically like a Chicago to in the U.S. Like if Mexico City is New York, Guadalajara is Chicago,
mm-hmm.
or I don't know, in my opinion. My mom grew up in a very small town that is about 90 kilometers away from the city. That's where my grandmother is from, and her family had been there for, forever. I never realized how lucky I was in my upbringing because even though I was able to go to school in the city, I went back to the small town very often, and that's very much part of my identity. The town is called Atoyac. But anyway, to the point. The story is that my grandmother was so particular about the way that she liked her coffee that she grew a coffee bush, and she would pick the berries and let them dry and, process them whichever way she liked them, and then would roast it in her wood stove that she had up until I was I don't know, maybe 8 years old. In her house, she had a wood stove that she would have to light every day. So she would toast it and then grind it and make her coffee just the way that she liked it because she was a very particular woman. And, as far as what is concerned to me, one of my earliest memories with my grandmother is her giving me café con leche for dinner. And you can imagine, I'm probably 4 years old and I'm chugging coffee,
bouncing off the
caffeinated
walls.
coffee and sugar. I mean, I never had any trouble sleeping,
Wow, a flex.
Yeah, flex. Coffee is just part of my identity. I don't remember being around a kitchen table without coffee being part of it. And, I remember the grinder that my grandmother used, and it was this very old school. It was this crank thing. So I remember the whole process and the way that she made coffee, and it was just really good. Just by itself or with sugar or with milk, and then there's the café de olla with piloncillo, with cinnamon. It's just food, drink, socializing is just what I've been doing my whole life.
I love that. And is this your grandma that Loba is kind of an homage to in the name also?
No.
Was I reading this somewhere?
I mean, yes and no. In this small town, there's... What's the population? I think the population was 5,000 people. I don't know. Very small town. It's next to, or it's in a valley, close to the mountains, and there's always this legends of, a lion living in the mountain, which there's no lions over there. But it's the wolf and the coyotes and the pumas and the lynxes, because it's wild. There's a little bit of desert. There's a dry water basin there. So, when you're close to nature and you're adjacent to a more ancient culture, which are in very different small towns in Mexico, there's just more to be in touch with nature. And the legends of wolves were something that people just talked about, The other part is there was this podcast that I listened to, and it's the story about the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park. And, before there were all these misconceptions about, wolves and the wolf packs and alpha male wolves and the leaders of the pack and all of these things, very male oriented. But during the study, there was this female wolf who was just so badass. I invite everyone to listen to it. It's called 06 Female, 06 Female.
Cool.
I listened to it via Snap Judgment. It's one of my favorite podcasts.
We'll link to it in the show notes on this podcast so people can find it.
Yeah. So it's this wolf, this badass wolf who is not taking a pack, not taking a mate, and just like being like a superhero within the park. She's very hard to track. She hunts in the way that no other wolf has hunted before. And also like this whole thing, she's not mating. She is like an alpha on her own. I think at some point she takes on 2 younger male wolves. So I think when I was about to open the shop and still thinking about what to name it, I had different ideas. And then I listened to this podcast and I was like, Loba pastry. That's it, like I also, again, not to sound too pompous, but that's what I want to do. I don't want to I want to break the stereotypes of the female pastry chef. I want to break the misconceptions of what it takes to be successful in the kitchen. I don't want to be into this. I'm escaping this male-dominated world to do something different. It doesn't mean that I don't have any standards. It just means that I want to go about it differently. And this podcast just really spoke to me.
Yeah, I have goosebumps right now. I love thinking about that. And I think it's the perfect namesake for the bakery and the cafe.
Mm-hmm.
Looking ahead at, maybe this next year or just kind of the future for Loba in general, like what are you trying to manifest or to make for yourself?
I don't know.
Everything.
Everything. There's been many iterations of the shop. I think I opened it to be completely honest, to satisfy my own ego, so to sort of like to prove to myself that I was capable to make good food, good pastries, that I was capable of running a business, that I was capable of doing something worthwhile. But as the years have passed, I realized that, I'll always have an ego, but Loba Pastry is no longer about me. It's about the people that work there. It's about the community. And especially at this space, especially of how busy we are, I just want to continue giving people like me or that were in my position the opportunity to do something else. The shop is never going to be this full career for anyone, but I see it as the perfect stepping stone for people to, take up from there, whatever it may be. If they want to learn pastry, I have opportunities for interns to just come learn everything that I have to teach them. It can be a temporary place of like comfort and community, but that's what I intend to do with the shop, at least. Of course, the pastries are always going to be good. Of course, I'm going to continue to try to innovate different pastries. I'm going to try to bring different flavors. Whatever ingredient or like technique I'm like obsessed about mastering or playing with at the time. As the years go by, it's really less about me and more about everyone else that is part of it.
That's really nice. I love hearing that. And I can't help but want to ask you about if there is a technique or flavor that you're currently fixating on.
Yes, kind of. I have this, and it's just terrible. I have this idea of doing something with passion fruit, and I still can't like figure it out. I don't know how I want to do it. I have a handful of ideas. The downside is that there's no way of getting fresh passion fruit in the city, or not in a way that I would be able to afford it.
Yeah, it's so expensive.
So expensive, and whatever we get is not very good. But that's sort of my latest obsession. Just passion fruit. I just want to explore it as a flavor.
Maybe it's like a glaze or a syrup or something.
I don't know.
We'll see.
I have a few ideas. That, and I'm always trying to put more bitter elements into pastry. Yeah. Like one of the big ones that I make is the sesame bun. It's only on Fridays and Saturdays, and it's a black sesame paste, which is like very rich, nutty, but also sweet, but also a little bitter. And I really like it. I feel like that is one of the signature pastries that I make. But I want more. I want another one, another unlikely good pastry,
Yeah, definitely. I think that I was reading, I can't remember what I was reading, was reading something that was talking about how bitter is a flavor that is one of the most uncommon flavors here in the United States. Like people don't really crave it in that same kind of way. But I'm hoping that the kind of Aperol spritz, Cynar spritz, like as Amaro and digestives become more popular, that people will be doing more unexpected things with bitterness, because once you get the taste for it, there is something kind of fixating about it.
Yeah. I agree. I absolutely agree. I really appreciate it as a note. And I think that's why it keeps me coming back to coffee, because bitterness it's a note from coffee that you'll never get rid of. It's part of what it is. There's, of course, many other notes to appreciate, the florals and the sweetness, but it's always going to be bitter. And that's what I like it. Maybe it's because I'm always going to be bitter.
Yeah, you're bitter at the core.
Yeah. It's true. I am.
It reminds me of a conversation I had on this podcast maybe a month ago with the Filipina cookbook author Abby Balingit. She did this book, Mayumu, that came out this past year. And this is the one chocolate chip cookie that maybe you should try, because she has an adobo chocolate chip cookie in that book that has, soy sauce and bay leaf and vinegar and all of these kind of like savory ingredients in that pastry. And it allows it to have the kind of like chew that you would have from a good amount of sugar in a cookie without it being overly sweet, because it's being balanced out with all of those things. And so I think that's another like trend in baking that I'm hoping to see more of, is the savory sweet combination.
That sounds really good. I'm not familiar with her baking, but I'm going to look it up after this.
Yeah, I'll send you the book.
I want to try the cookie.
I'm curious if you would want to shout out any other bakeries or even like independent bakers in Chicago that you think are doing fun and different things right now.
Yes, I do. Yeah, that was one of the questions. I was actually thinking about it, this like, what do you think about pastries in Chicago?
Yeah, do you think there is like a certain vibe or any like trends that you're seeing across the city, or is it more of people doing their own thing?
I think that the vibe is still very boring. I still think that it's very European centric, and it's just copy and paste whatever Europe is doing with the croissants. Oh my God, that cookie croissant thing. I'm so tired of them. Or the round croissant. It's always just croissant centric. I know it sounds silly because I have this mullet croissant, but it's just like plain croissant.
Yeah.
So boring. But however, there's a handful of people that I really like what they're doing. Number one, my friend Dina from Sugar Moon. And I love talking about Dina's baked goods because they're very homey, and she's like, oh, they're very simple. And normally I would talk so much shit about a pastry that has like so many things in it. But the way Dina puts all these elements together and texture, and it would be like 20 different things, I love so much. She does it so good.
Well, can you give me like an example? I'm trying to picture this.
Oh my God. Okay. So she did these brioche buns. I think it's brioche for breakfast. So it had an egg and it had cheese and like, I want to say sun-dried tomatoes and sumac and also kind of a nut. So it was like a loaded
It's like a breakfast sandwich bun.
Yeah, bun. And it was so good. She also has made these carnitas, poblano, cheese, croissants.
Oh.
Oh,
my
so
heart
good.
rate just like elevated with every word you're saying. I was like, oh my God, is she going to say Danish? Is she going to say croissant?
No, and she also, the chocolate chip cookies that she makes, it's the only one that I will like promote. She puts tahini in it. So, it's that like bitter note that I really like. Yeah, I love the way that she plays with flavor. Best bakery in Chicago. But also a newcomer, my friend Justin is opening a bakery called Del Sur. His background, he's Filipino and he's trying to bring the Filipino flavors into his pastries. Just different, he has this calamansi breakfast bun. I don't know what he calls it, but it's like a banana cream. And it's like a Danish turron. He calls it the turron Danish.
Oh, yeah. A turron is like it's a dessert spring roll originally, I think. But banana cream in that combination in the Philippines.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I think, turron for me just means like a candied fruit, or in Mexico at least. But anyway, I just like that he's still focusing on laminated pastries, which is fine, but the flavors are different. Sugar Moon and Del Sur coming up maybe 2024. begin 2025.
Wow, I'm going to have to come back to Chicago to eat all of those pastries because they sound so great.
So good. So tasty.
I want to close the episode today with playing a little taste check game with you. So I'll give you a category and you can just tell me the first answer that comes into your head.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Favorite cookbook?
I don't have any. I'm terrible at this.
Okay. Quick answer. We love it. Your favorite season for baking?
Fall.
Your favorite pastry item at Loba right now?
Sesame buns.
Your go-to coffee order?
A little latte.
What kind of milk?
Whole milk.
Whole milk.
Yeah.
Flex. Okay. Your favorite music to listen to while baking, if you listen to music while baking?
Yes. Angsty music. So either new metal or 90s techno.
Okay. I love both of those answers. And it's so funny because I think there's that classic trope, right? That like whatever you're feeling goes into the dough. Like people can eat that. But every pastry chef I talk to is listening to like true crime podcasts or kind of like things like that are going into the pastries.
Oh no. I just need to either be able to move my feet or throw things. It's the two moves. The two moves at Loba. We're either dancing or we're throwing things in a funny way.
Yeah. Your go-to item to order in the pastry case, like at a different bakery?
Croissant, I guess. Plain croissant.
Research, yeah.
Yeah.
Something that you will never make from scratch?
I don't know.
Well, most people say puff pastry, but you do that all the time, so.
Oh, yeah. Why? Is it hard? No. Why do people don't make it from scratch? Oh, by hand.
Yeah.
You don't want to do it by hand. Okay.
I think some people are just scared. Like, I wouldn't make puff pastry at all.
They're just getting the wrong teacher. I'm very confident that I could teach anyone how to laminate by hand.
Okay.
I did it for 5 years. We didn't get a laminator a sheeter until the new shop. So for 6 years, we were doing everything by hand.
Wow. I'm really glad you got one.
Yeah.
Your favorite Chicago restaurant?
Warlord.
Your favorite Chicago coffee shop?
Loba pastry.
That's not Loba pastry.
That's not okay. How dare I? Magnifico.
Okay. And then finally, a restaurant that is not in your neighborhood that you wish could be your neighborhood restaurant. Like it magically appears on your block.
I never go out to eat.
Anywhere in the world.
There's like always food at home. Okay, anywhere in the world. It would have to be in my grandmother's town. There's this like old school like cenaduria, and they made this tostadas. But the tostada, they're original from the region. They are bigger than your head, and they're called tostadas raspadas because they scrape them, and when they're wet, they scrape them, then they dry them, and then they fry them. And it's this very intricate process for this like hole in the wall. And it has, I don't know how to say it in English. Pork leg.
En español?
Lomo. No, lomo de cerdo. Cerdo. Lomo de cerdo.
It's like the back?
Yeah, back. I don't know what that cut is called.
We'll look it up after.
Okay.
Is it like a fatty cut or what? How does it taste?
It's like cooked in its own juices, slow cooked, but it's not barbecue. And it's just flavor from the pork and like salt. There's no like sauce or adobo or anything in it. But anyway, it's a tostada. Beans, refried obviously in lard. It has the lomo medallions, lettuce, a tomato sauce, and pickled onions. And it's so good.
Wow.
It's so good. It's like a giant tostada. You only need one.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe when you go home, it'll have magically appeared on your block
I
after
have a
this
picture of
conversation.
it somewhere in my Instagram. But yeah, if I could have any restaurant in the world, I want that.
Well, I like that. And I would also say that if I could have a Loba in New York, I would be very happy. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with me.
Thank you for having me.
We're back with three things we each are enjoying. What's your first one?
My first one is a shameless self-plug, which is that the new issue of Cake Zine is out. It's called Candyland. And it's about the intersection of candy and the natural and unnatural worlds in many different ways that I will talk about on the show very soon. I'll have my co-founder Tanya back in, but I will just say that it's maybe my favorite issue, definitely my favorite issue of it so far. I know I say that every time, which I think is the sign of a good and growing project, but really I think like there are so many special things going on in terms of the like diversity of content, the different forms, etc.
I love the piece about preppers and the way that candy can be found in these prepper scenarios. Talk a little bit about that piece.
Yeah, Amy Rose Spiegel wrote a really fun piece for us where she interviewed a bunch of like doomsday preppers around the country about what they're stocking in their bunkers for the apocalypse, but specifically candy as this kind of mechanism of delight, a reminder of the world as it used to be, also a mechanism of being able to trade with people when the apocalypse happens. Basically that like maybe you come to someone's bunker and you have precious gasoline, but you haven't had chocolate in 2 years and they have a big like stockpile of Three Musketeers bars. So they can count on the fact that you would trade something that's maybe more like quote unquote useful for something like candy that is symbolic of pleasure and nostalgia and all of these other things.
Wow, it's like logline, Willy Wonka, post-apocalyptic horror.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really fun as an apocalyptic candy trading movie. I think that story is fun in the context of the piece because that's not really about the natural world, so to speak, but it's about like candy as this kind of cultural artifact that permeates through society, and that could potentially be the system of currency in a new world. Candy also doesn't really go bad. We have some great recipes in the issue. Fabian Van Housk from Contra and Wild Air did a recipe for alegria, which are the like puffed amaranth seed candies that are popular in Mexico and South America. We have like a dirt and worms cup tiramisu recipe from Zoe Denenberg, which is like the dirt and worms cups that maybe you would have in the 90s at a kid's birthday party with the like Oreo dirt and the gummy worms, but instead it's a big tiramisu.
I love that spin. Zoe's amazing. So.
Yeah, it's really fun. I will stop myself from just reading the whole TOC aloud, but Candyland at cakezine.com.
Yeah, and definitely hit the link in the show notes. It's right there. Buy it.
What's your first thing?
My first thing is I was just in Atlanta yesterday for a book event, and I was able to tour a brand new distillery called Minwa Spirits, and it's in Doraville, Georgia. It's in the north part of Atlanta, and they're doing soju and makgeolli, which is a growing, obvious trend. We just had Hana Makgeolli on, and we've talked a lot about makgeolli over the years, but I'm really impressed what Minwa is doing. Makgeolli has to be fresh. It's very local, and the product I tasted was so cool. And they do an Indian style gin as well, which I think is unique. They're bringing in the flavors of chai, and they worked with a local Indian chef to bring those flavors together. But check it out, Minwa Spirits in Doraville, Georgia. It's opening in August. I really love what they're doing.
Yeah, that sounds great. The next time I'm in Georgia, I have to go there.
Absolutely. What's your next one?
My next one is that I finally went to the gelato cart that is always popping off in my neighborhood in Fort Greene outside of Evelina on DeKalb. And I kind of thought it wouldn't be, I don't know why I thought it wouldn't be good, but it was really, really good. And now I know that I'm walking distance to really good gelato. Oh. So I kind of every night start to think, should I go out and get some more? I had pistachio, which
obviously the first choice.
Which my scooper said was the most popular flavor.
It is.
And I got a raspberry with like kind of shards of white chocolate in it. And they both were really great. The raspberry was very refreshing. The pistachio had this really amazing, like nutty, rich depth of flavor. And I think that it's a really elite flavor combination when it's hot out because you can refresh yourself with the raspberry and then you have the kind of like richer pistachio. So if anyone is walking by this gelato cart right out in front, it's the restaurant making their own gelato. And I've noticed this being kind of a trend of restaurants here over the past couple years where they have the gelato carts out in front of their restaurant. And I loved it. So
I love that trend. I've seen that a lot.
Catch me there all summer.
Oh, man.
What's your next thing?
Well, I just returned from Athens and Crete. So I was on a taste travels with Susie Karache. Wonderful trip. I know I was sending you some messages along the way, and it was such a beautiful trip. And we're having a couple more taste travels in this year, and we're announcing 3 more for 25. So check this space. But we had our closing dinner Epikesi Farm, which is kind of in the hills above Heraklion, which is a cool city in Crete. And I just have to give it its flowers. It had like many flowers there. It's a 300-acre farm growing 30 plus vegetables and herbs. They're producing olive oil and goat cheese. And really what it was doing was really examining the way like locavore cooking happens naturally in Crete. It's not really a term there because it's the way the Cretans have cooked for generations. Snails is really big in Crete. So pork is big, lamb is of course big, but snails are a big part of the history of Crete. Great protein source during lean times in a country that has had a lot of conflict in that part of the world. Snails have sustained the Cretans, and I love this preparation. It was cooked simply in olive oil and rosemary. We also had smoked pork belly, a paki it's called, and it's cooked over. We had it. This place is dope. It's like cooking over this large fireplace. There is zero electricity in this restaurant.
Wow. Fire only.
Fire only, not an easy service. It was like 30 of us, and they were just crushing the service. And, the lamb, I want to talk about that a little bit. In Crete, I found the lamb preparation was really unique. I don't know if it necessarily is for everyone. Lamb in the States is really prominent, and we have got a great domestic lamb program here, and we get a lot from Australia. And I believe we do it in a way, we do a lot of slow braising. We cook the meat to like a temperature that feels right. In Crete, they're like literally cooking it over a flame after a very, very hard cure in salt. So it's creating a very thick crust of skin and salt. And it's like a brick. You peel it off and you get to the aromatic meat. And so it's all cooked very hard. And I loved it. I love that style. And it cuts the way the knife cuts are rough, and it felt the product is locally grazed, and it's extremely flavorful, but a little intense for some of our travelers. But that's what happens. You try different versions of a protein that
Yeah, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about getting to travel somewhere and really get into restaurants and the food scene in that kind of way is you're getting to try a preparation that maybe would be harder to find anywhere else.
I'm just going to say yamas. That means cheers. We cheersed all along, and we had a great trip. And I have to say, check this space for future taste travels. Eliza, what's your final one?
My last thing is that I went to a really fun queer aperitivo event last night that a bunch of folks in the food industry here in New York have been putting on. You can check that out on Instagram if you look up queer aperitivo. And this event was at Animal, which is a new queer bar that opened in Williamsburg, I think a couple months ago. There were charcuterie boards from Foster Sundry, which is a great butcher in Bushwick. There were jellies by Solid Wiggles, which is that really fun Brooklyn-based kind of like spiked, like a Negroni Jell-O square vibe. And the bar itself, I think, is a really cool addition to the queer nightlife scene here in New York. You enter kind of through a patio, and it's kind of a split bar with access on both sides. It feels very like LA almost in the design to me. So I just wanted to shout that out as well. We're recording this during Pride weekend here in New York, so it's very top of mind and just a fun addition to the scene.
Beautiful to hear about inclusivity in Brooklyn and how queer spaces are certainly not in monolith. It's happening all over food and bev, and I love that the food sounds dope. I mean, if you go to a Solid Wiggles event, holy cow, you gotta go.
Yeah.
You gotta like order a couple of those Jell-O shots.
Yeah, and the event is really kind of born out of this desire to be offering a gathering place that maybe isn't so much rooted to alcohol. It is available, obviously, because you're at a bar, but they've done this at different events and spaces and places, and there's like snacks and olives, and it's a little bit more of like a intergenerational hangout. So Queer Aperitivo NYC.
We'll link to it in the show notes. Definitely bookmark that. I love it.
What's your last thing?
All right, I'm going to say this name slowly. Mathimada Margarikis. I think that's right. I'm going to link to it for sure. During our trip to Athens, we went to this really cool culinary school. And I have to say, I've been to a lot of like cooking demos on trips, either as a member of the press or just part of Taste Travels. And sometimes, it's a little bit of like a dog and pony show. It's not necessarily a real school. But if you are in Athens, look this place up, book one of the classes. It's amazing. We got such a great foundational lecture and hands-on cooking. We cooked a number of dishes. The one that comes to mind is Porto Kalapita, which is a traditional Greek syrup cake made with dried phyllo. So they're taking phyllo dough that can be used to kind of hold things in. We think about the spinach pie, like phyllo is used as like an exterior pastry dough, but really this is a brand new way. You're using this dried phyllo, and it's kind of substituting flour in this cake. And it's a syrup cake, which are very common in the Mediterranean region. So you're making this beautiful cake, and you're pouring over, get this, an orange simple syrup, and you pour that over. And there's a technique with it. You obviously have to get your timing right. The cake has to be still warm. And you've got your simple that's perfectly done. And then you let it sit for 40 minutes or so. And you've got this saturated orange, really rich cake. I mean, syrup cakes are like my jam. When you make them at home, they're awesome.
I love that. I've never made a syrup cake at home, but I'm imagining just sitting and watching and waiting as it fully saturates with that syrup.
It's so true, and I've never thought of it as well at home, but they're quite, easy. You're making your batter, and then you're just pouring over and letting it sit, and then you're baking it. So I think it's a really cool way to bring Greek culture to home. There's a lot of recipes around. I'll link to one that I find that was pretty close to what we were demoed. But this cooking school, you got to seek it out. I think it's kind of like in an anonymous building in a different part of Athens that isn't tourist centric, but that's great. It's like definitely where professionals train, and I love this school.
Well, considering that I did not go to Greece, maybe I'll try to make this dessert at home instead.
I would love to hear that. Thanks for doing 3 things, Eliza.
Anytime. This is Taste is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Eliza Abarbanel. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things happening.